Hi everybody, welcome to our Facebook Live. March is National Social Workers Month, and to celebrate that, today we're talking with Koretta Skelton, who's one of the social workers here at Hospice at the Chesapeake. So thanks for coming and chatting.
Thanks for having me.
So one of the things we're going to talk about today are sort of some of the misunderstandings, misconceptions about the role of a social worker in hospice. So let's just jump right in and start with that. Like the very first thing that comes to your mind, what's one of the biggest misunderstandings or misconceptions that you come across with your role?
Well, one of the biggest misconceptions we come across is that individuals have an idea that it's more social service based, and like child welfare based than it is hospice. So they're thinking that we're more looking into whether or not it's from a stance of, are we getting something or are we not?
Are you checking in?
Yeah, are you checking in on me? Are you going to take something, or are you?
So interesting, because that's like the polar opposite of what you're there for.
We're there for more support and more making sure that you have, like anything that you have concerns about, that we are there to kind of talk them through and seeing what type of support you need.
Right.
And also working through like the emotional piece of it and the loss or the uncertainty that the patient and the family are feeling.
So let's talk about your role and relationship with the patient first. So you come in, you eliminate this understanding or misunderstanding of somebody thinking that you're there to check in on them or that you're there to report what's going on.
Yeah, we do that on the phone call to make sure it's some uncertainty about it. Sometimes we get phone calls about, so what do you do? Why are you coming
Why do I need to see
Why do I need to see a social worker?
Okay.
And so we talk to them about, we're there to talk about their goals for being on hospice, what they want the experience to be like. We also talk about what type of advanced care planning they have done, and also how they've been feeling since they found out that their doctor's recommending them for hospice.
That I would think that it has to be a huge discussion to have with somebody.
Sometimes it is, and then sometimes it's more so, oh, well, I referred myself, or we referred ourselves so we know what we're getting into, and we just want to make sure that we're comfortable, make sure that we're finding out what type of things, or having the support to plan for the end of life.
Right. So one of the very first things that you were talking about almost sounded like an education component. So with talking about sort of the advanced directives and just sort of
So with education comes empowerment, and so we try to make sure that the families know that we are here to support them with what they want to do. And so we provide education around what your decisions are, what your options are within your decisions, why, like making sure that they know why they were referred to hospice, because sometimes...
Have you come across that before? People aren't really sure about
sometimes they have... sometimes we have blocks when we get information that's kind of hard to hear, and so you hear some
sort of that denial, like, or just not able to absorb it all?
Not able to just absorb it. I personally feel like denial is a defense mechanism and a way for people to cope, and it's not necessarily all bad. So I think it's more that someone is hearing information, and while they're hearing the information, they're processing in their head about what they're hearing, and so it's kind of like Charlie Brown's teacher. Right.
Gotcha.
So just reiterating that information to them about what we understand it to be and what do they think it is.
That's probably really helpful to just even allow that space and that time to sort of process, right? Like you're just kind of talking through, okay, tell me what's your understanding of your prognosis and your disease process and your health condition and all that sort of.
And we also help with like processing of like different changes within the process of being on hospice. So sometimes people are on hospice and they're making decisions, and then as their disease progresses, introducing medications that help them be more comfortable, or ordering a hospital bed and processing with them what that hospital bed means to them, or what that means in their process. Like, does it mean that they feel like if they're in the bed, then they're not getting out of the bed anymore? So having those conversations, because medically it would be beneficial, but sometimes it's hard to get past what that means to them. And not all the time do we have the opportunity to talk about the changes that happen so swiftly.
I was going to say, sometimes that, I would think that can be a really rapid changing, conversation.
It can be.
Right.
Sometimes it might be, I've seen someone yesterday or I saw someone on Friday, and we were having conversations about what we were planning to do in 2 weeks. And then something happens on the weekend, and I am going in to talk about different changes that have happened over the weekend and where they're, how they're feeling about their body changing so quickly and unexpectedly.
So you're really helping them sort of just understand that a little bit more. And again, it's the whole education and empower. And I'm thinking too, this is a situation where so much is out of your control.
Yes.
All of this is happening to you.
It is.
That it seems like being able to talk that through and just having somebody in a social worker role that's able to guide you through that therapeutically.
Right. And we also work with the caregivers around that, because sometimes patients have certain goals and caregivers have certain goals. And so mitigating those goals and talking to them about how we can work together to make the experience bearable for both of them.
I was just going to ask that because, we're talking initially about your focus on the patient, but it's probably not just that person involved in that end of life
family
process.
Dynamics, friends who the patient considers family, because it's not always the family that we're born into, and so who they consider a family, who they consider friends, and sometimes friends are more impactful for the patient than the family. So honoring that for that unit, and supporting them around it.
So do you then act sort of as, buffer's not the right word, but that person that kind of helps coordinate
curative treatment?
Right.
And their doctor has said it wouldn't be beneficial, or it could be beneficial, but there's no guarantee.
Right.
So the patient have decided that's not what they want.
Okay.
But the caregiver or their family or their friends want for them to fight more, or want for them to do more. And so the patient may have said to me, this is what I want, but this is what they want.
So the patient may have said, understanding coming on hospice, that's sort of the decision that you make when you come on hospice service, that you're releasing that curative treatment option.
Yes.
And they're comfortable with that. The patient may be comfortable with that, but then the surrounding family members,
their support system may not be.
And
so facilitating that conversation and supporting the patient around their decision, and helping them to say, or help empower them to say, this is what I want. So I may be in a conversation with maybe 6 people, and say, well, we have had this conversation. I know that this has been a challenge for you as a family, and so this is the things that we've discussed, and would you like to expound on that more? And I kind of have a conversation with whomever the challenging piece is, or whoever needs the motivation to have the conversation about whatever the circumstances are, and seeing how much they want me to disclose, how much they want for me to speak and for them to be able to touch in, I generally ask, would you like for me to say it or would you like to?
Right.
And if so, if it's me to say it, I always check in, was that accurate?
Right.
And so or
really
they'll
facilitating
say,
that,
really facilitating those conversations. Yes.
Right. Which I can only imagine that it would be really helpful to have somebody like a social worker.
I think it is.
Yeah, able to perform that role, because it's hard to talk. It's such an emotional time to begin with. You're going through a lot physically, emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me a little bit about the role of a social worker in context of the team that comes in for hospice care. So when you have hospice care, you get a nurse, you get certified nursing assistant, you have a chaplain.
And you have a social worker, and you also have the opportunity to have a volunteer.
Right, and then the physician also.
And the physician, yes.
And
so I love our team.
So you fit in that. You're a piece of that team.
Yes, I'm a piece of that team. I'm a vital part of the team.
Yep, absolutely.
Because sometimes myself and the nurse will do joint visits for our initial visit.
Okay.
Just so that because when we come in, sometimes it's overwhelming. We come in like a flood. Mm-hmm. And some family members like, oh, that was quick. But we come in like a flood, and so sometimes it can be overwhelming. So we come in and we talk about, so the nurse is talking about medical things, I'm talking about psychosocial, and depending on what the dynamics are, we might have to, the nurse might have to work with the patient, and I am talking with the caregiver. Okay. And that might happen several times throughout the experience, throughout the time that the patient is on service. Okay. Depending on what happens. So if there's something that happened overwhelming, if there's some sudden change that happened that they weren't expecting, even though we talk about what you may expect or what may present.
Right. Well, no one's experience
are the same, and people have different experiences with death. So some families have not had a significant death in their family ever. Right. And so they don't.
So this is their first.
Yes, it's a first experience. Yeah. It's a first, like the feeling is new. The feeling of grief and loss is new. And so you might not be able to put words to it yet. And so that is what our role is, what my role as a social worker is.
And I'm sure there's a sense of fear because of the unknown.
Because of the unknown, because of the uncertainty, there may be some fear, there may be some anger, there just anxiety around like what is to come, about what's next. So helping the family around that, with that is what we do.
What's your favorite part?
My favorite part of being a hospice social worker is meeting new people and seeing different experiences of how love is manifested. Because love doesn't always look nice and cushy. Mm-hmm. And so so that's my favorite part of it.
That sounds like it may have broadened your perspective a little bit of what love can look like.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And sometimes love isn't the first emotion or the first word that you would think of with a circumstance, but because obligation might come up or how one might feel, and even from that, depending on what people's dynamics are, sometimes it's not that great.
Well, and as you even just say the word obligation, it brings in mind your obligation from the patient perspective and the obligation from the caretaker perspective. Like there's different, focuses for each of those folks that are involved in this journey.
Yeah, and also making sure that there are different aspects of the journey, but there are also different ways that obligation, when people are obligated to do things, sometimes they might they might feel like there's anger.
Okay.
There might feel
so some layering emotions.
There's some layering emotions.
Mhm.
There's some I can't think of the word right now. It's scaring me, but it's more so of the duality of both of them.
Gotcha.
That's where I was thinking.
Gotcha.
It's more of a duality of
simultaneously.
The two things can be in the same space, even if you're not having a good experience or
Right.
haven't had a good experience with the person that you're caring for, or vice versa. So, like the patient, if this person is caring for them and they haven't had a good
A
experience
history
with them.
that's been complicated.
Exactly.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. So before we wrap up, are there any other big misunderstandings or misconceptions that I think we've covered? We've talked a lot about sort of what the role actually is, what
Right.
you get to do as a social worker, and now that you're working with both the patient and the caretaker,
Yeah.
the extended family, or whoever constitutes that for that person. Is there anything else that might jump out at you that we haven't covered?
No, I think that covers it.
Okay.
That we are here for advocating for the family.
Yeah.
I think
That's
is
a big piece.
a big piece. Once we find out what your goals are and we find out what you would want. So
What
some
matters
people
to
are
them.
saying, I want to be at home no matter what. Like I don't want to leave home. So
Right.
like advocating with the team and saying, okay, so how can we support this family
Yeah.
to make sure that this person stays at home?
Right,
Yeah.
awesome. So before we wrap up, I just want to thank the John and Kathy Belcher Institute for their generous support of the community education programs at Hospice of the Chesapeake. And I want to thank Koretta for sitting here and chatting with me and filling everyone in on the awesome things that social workers do. So
Thank you for
very
having
much.
me.
And thank you guys for watching.